Welcome back. My name is Kyle Jensen. I'm the Director of Entrepreneurial Programs here at the Yale School of Management. Entrepreneurship is, for me, an area that I am greatly passionate about. I submit to you that it is one of the last great adventures available to you in this life, and I firmly hope that you choose to become entrepreneurs during your time here. It is also an area that we are investing in greatly. We have new courses in entrepreneurship, 6 new courses this year. We're expanding massively in that area. We also have a multitude of resources to support our entrepreneurs while you are here, including the Entrepreneurial Study Suite downstairs, fellowships, and all sorts of things to help you turn your entrepreneurial experience here into part of your educational experience during your time at the School of Management here. So, our speaker today is Austin Ligon. Austin, you probably best know him as the founder of CarMax, but he has had a varied career. He was part of the class of 1980, right? So he was here when SOM was a startup, right? And
And
seriously.
a dodgy one at that.
That's right. You might not have invested. I'm serious. So Austin was the teaching assistant for the very first class in entrepreneurship here, taught by Bill Donaldson. And Austin had told me some time ago that Bill taught him numerous things and had a profound effect on his direction. But one thing that he left with him that informs his talk today is that entrepreneurship is not just about starting a new venture, right? It's about innovating and changing organizations from small to large across business and society, right? That there are many ways for you to be an entrepreneur. And that is the topic of Austin's presentation for you today, right? You don't have to be a pimply-faced 19-year-old Mark Zuckerberg, right? You don't even have to be Austin Ligon. You can be you, and what you learn here at the School of Management, I think will help you unchain that inner entrepreneur. So, Austin, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining us today. We all appreciate it very much.
Thanks. So I'm going to talk a little today about my entrepreneurial journey and, as Kyle said, trying to help you find yours. And let me talk first about one, as Dick Hexter told me in the entrepreneurship class with Bill Donaldson, if you were an entrepreneur, you wouldn't be in this class. You'd already be out running your business. Now, that's not exactly true, but there's an element of truth in that. I mean, most of you are here because you want to find your path. And so one of the books I read once on speaking said, the first thing to do in any presentation is identify who the enemy is. The enemy is coming out of SOM having put all this time, effort, and money into your education and ending up in a soul-crushing bureaucratic job that'll make you a lot of money and leave you 30 years from now feeling like, what did I get done with my life? And what you want to do is let me help you understand. It's not what industry you go into. It's not whether you start a company your first day out of school. It's really the mindset you develop and the change that you bring to organizations that makes you an entrepreneur. So my goal is to really help you figure out how can I develop an entrepreneurial mindset by talking a bit about my journey, about some other journeys, and really about you, how to look at yourself and your own capabilities, and how to use SOM to help you go on that journey. Because for me, SOM was a transformational experience. And I think it can be for you too, and we'll talk a bit about that. So let me talk first about my entrepreneurial journey. And I'm going to talk first about CarMax because it was the entrepreneurial opportunity of a lifetime for me, and I think for anybody. It's rare that you have a chance to start with a clean sheet of paper, build a business that grows into a large multi-billion-dollar business. It just doesn't happen a lot. And for me, that started when I decided to leave Marriott Corporation. I was Senior Vice President of Strategy. I had already started a business for Marriott. Marriott was narrowing down to hotels. Bill Marriott basically pretty much was convinced I was a whippersnapper, which meant I wasn't going to run any business there for a while, and it was time for me to move on. The one thing I did do really well at Marriott was I managed my exit so that my boss didn't have a gap, and I made sure that there was somebody to take my place when I left. That turned out to be a good thing because my boss at that time, Bill Tiefel, is now chairman of CarMax. He was the first director I hired. So one of the things that Bill Donaldson told us is never burn a bridge if you don't have to. Always consider that everybody you're dealing with is somebody in your future who can be really helpful to you if you're honest and trustworthy with them. So where did I go from Marriott? I was well on my way to be the guy to take Kentucky Fried Chicken to China. PepsiCo had hired me. I was about to go to Louisville, Kentucky. There was no KFC in China. Can you imagine poor China without KFC? You might know KFC is the biggest brand in China now. And having lived in Asia, I knew selling fried chicken in China was not going to be hard. This was going to be a great idea. But, and they're everywhere. But a really amazing entrepreneur intervened in my life, and instead of something exotic like China, I ended up in Richmond, Virginia, working for an electronics and appliances company. And you would think, oh yeah, that sounds really interesting. It was a guy named Rick Sharp. He was a computer entrepreneur who had retired by the time he was 29 years old and was hired by Circuit City to come in and roll out the Circuit City concept. Rick contacted me and said, look, this is a great business, but there's a lot of opportunity out there in the world of retail, and I think we could use Circuit City as a venture capitalist to go create a new business and conquer some really bigger area of retail using some of our money, some of our people, and some of our skills. And that was just too compelling to me, because that's what I really wanted to do, was do a new business. But as I'll talk about, you need capital to do that. So I was there for about 9 months, helping with the Circuit City business, and then really began the search. And being an old BCG guy, it's not very hard. When you're searching for a new business in an arena, what do? You go to the Commerce Department, book on retail sales, and you say, what do people sell? And you categorize things out. We ended up doing something like 8 white papers, because we were looking for big industry, no big box player entrenched. We were looking for a huge consumer gap, and we were looking someplace where our skills fit. And after doing that search, what we found was that there were really 2 industries that made sense, where big box logic had not been applied on a large scale, and that was furniture and automobiles. The problem with automobiles was it was controlled by the new car manufacturers and franchise dealer law. And then an entrepreneur who was doing some research for us, a guy named Ron Moore. Ron Moore invented Staples. He just didn't happen to call it Staples. It's called Office America. He built 2 stores and got bought out. So you've never heard of Ron Moore. One of the things about entrepreneurship is the survivorship bias. You hear about the ones who end up owning the big companies, not the brilliant guys who are the first movers many times. But Ron asked a really good question. I call the $1 million question, which is, did you ever notice that half of all sales are in used cars? And it was kind of like my mind was ready to find a new concept, and it was like a seed crystal in a science experiment. Everything crystallized, and I realized that's our idea. I went to Rick, who was a really sharp guy. Midway through the second sentence, he said, you don't have to tell me anymore. I understand. This is the big idea, because auto is what we want to do. Used makes it even more difficult. This is what we want to do. So what did we do? We went to the board with a 1-page business plan. Said, rather than study this thing to death, we want to go build a store and then build a second store. And just give us the money. We don't want to waste our time doing a fake business plan. I'm from BCG. I can do you a 65-page business plan with no data. But, you know, I can assume a second point and draw a graph. But why would you want to do that? And we had a great board of retail entrepreneurs, and what they said is, makes sense to us, you know, and gave us $50 million. Believe me, venture capitalists don't work that way. So we spent the next year designing CarMax, and it was pretty simple. I had learned by that time, if you want to know how to do a retail business or a consumer business, ask consumers. So we started out by doing focus groups, 3 weeks worth of focus groups. If any of you guys ever sat behind the little screen in a focus group, you sit behind a one-way mirror and you watch people talk with a moderator. We watched all men, all women, men and women together. I can tell you they don't agree. They don't say the same thing when they're separate as when they're together in terms of behavior. Basically, women think men are idiots when it comes to negotiating, and men think they're geniuses. But hardly a surprise, at least to the women in the room. So one of the things we found was we would ask the same question every time. What do you like about the car buying process? We would get the same answer every time, which is silence. And then somebody would raise their hand and say, well, let me tell you what I don't like. And we're off to the races. And what they didn't like, it was very consistent. They hated the hide the peanut pricing. How many people in here have ever bought a car in the US? How many people have ever gotten a straight answer from a car dealer on what the price of a car was? And they hate that. And they, there's the car, the trade-in, the financing, the warranty, the aftermarket products. The dealers try to mix it all together and confuse you. That is what they do for a living. And they said, just tell me what it costs. Second thing they hated, the mystery of a used car. Am I buying somebody else's lemon? What's the guarantee? How do I know I'm getting a good car? I know I can save money. The question is, what am I really getting? Third issue was, I want to go someplace where I have all makes and models. I go to the Toyota guy who wants to sell me Toyotas. I go to the Honda guy who wants to sell me Hondas. I want it to be like Home Depot. I want to go in and see all the makes and models and have them be neutral between them so that I can buy what I want. And the final thing, a woman gave us the best clue on this. The car buying process is just not fun. And as this woman said, if somebody gave me $10,000 and said, why don't you go to Tyson's Corner, the big regional mall, and have a clothes shopping spree, it would be one of the weekends of my life. If they gave me twice that and said, why don't you go buy a new car or a used car, it would be like going to get a root canal. And yet I love cars. And why should it be like that? It should be just as much fun as anything else. So out of that, we designed CarMax. Low no-haggle prices, a la carte on every element, so every price is fixed, and you can take or leave any part of the deal. Secondly, 400 late model used cars. That covers about 85% of the waterfront, 0 to 60,000 miles. Guaranteed, 5-day money-back guarantee. You can give it back to us for 5 days for any reason or for no reason. And 30 days bumper-to-bumper warranty. What's that mean? That means if you think there's a problem, we'll fix it. Even if there's not a problem, we'll fix it. The consumer is always right on that. And then finally, we made it a fun process. How do you make it a fun process? You align the incentives of the salespeople with the consumer. Everyone else in the auto industry pays commission sales on margin. That is, the more margin you generate, the more commission you get. So when you go into a car dealership, basically, you're fighting with the salesperson over their family's income. And how in the world can they do for you what's best? I mean, there's no way. And it's really a 5-person tag team: the salesperson, the sales manager, the aftermarkets manager, the finance manager, and the store manager. So, they do this all day long, 24 hours a day. You do it once every 5 years. Guess who's better at it? Women know that, by the way. Most men haven't quite figured it out. But so what we did is we simply pay a commission based on the car sold. So whether you buy a Kia or a Mercedes, whether we're making money or losing money, the salesperson doesn't know. Their job is to sell you a car. They get paid the same. And because we have a return policy, if the consumer brings the car back, they lose their commission. So the whole incentive is, we've got 35,000 cars out there now. Find the right car for the consumer and satisfy their needs. Somebody described it as being like an English butler. Quiet until I need you, knowledgeable when I want you to be knowledgeable. You can find out what I want to find out, and then quiet again. And so that's the basic CarMax process. We then spent the next 4 years developing our operating processes because we were engineering type folks, operations folks, restaurant folks, hotel folks, retail folks, and we understood this is going to be the most complicated retail business anybody's ever created. So we've got to do this well. And we built one store, ran it for a year, built a second store, ran it for a year, built 2 more stores, ran them for a year, built 2 more stores and ran them for a year. Very slow, but we had to build the operating processes and refine the systems to make this work. And once we had done that, we were ready for national rollout. We were fortunate, just before the internet boom, we managed to go public, raise $400 million for 20% of the company, paid Circuit City back the $175 million they'd lent us up to that point. And they literally owned 80% of the company for no investment. So for them, it was an immediate home run, assuming that we stayed in business. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the next few years were like as we went through opening 30 stores in 30 months. Remember, we spent 4 years to open 6 stores. Then we're going to open a store a month for the next few years. And this gives you a pretty good idea. So, there you have it. A company called AutoNation, launched by a guy named Wayne Huizinga, who had already done Waste Management and Blockbuster, raised $2 billion, went into competition with us, and over the same 30 months that we built 30 stores, they built 30 stores, and they bought the 15 other stores started by 4 different organizations that had gone in to compete with us. We called it the shootout across the Sun Belt. We went market by market together across the Sun Belt. It was bloody. We lost $100 million over 3 years. The good news is we were the Russians. They were the Germans. They lost $1 billion over 3 years. And on or about 9:30 a.m., the 13th of December, 1999, they closed all their stores, surrendered their troops. And since that time, CarMax has never had a head-to-head competitor again. It's a great story because a lot of people go through something like this, and it's like, how can you possibly survive? And let me tell you, Wall Street thought we were dead. We went public at $10 a share. By the time this was over and AutoNation threw in the towel, they thought a bunch of washing machine salesmen from Richmond, they're next to go. We were 50 cents a share. So people in Silicon Valley always say, how do you hold on to your people? And I'll talk a little bit about inspiration later, but inspiration, telling people the truth, helping them understand that, look, Wall Street is Wall Street. It's not the business. And we understand where the business is. So over the next 2 years, we stopped growth. We focused on operational improvement. We went from break even to making nearly $100 million a year. And most importantly, in 2002, we negotiated our freedom from Circuit City. We convinced them that shareholders would be better off with 2 sets of stock. We did a tax-free distribution to shareholders, and we were completely independent of Circuit City from then on. For those of you who know the sad story of what happened to Circuit City, our view of their future and their view of their future was a little different, and unfortunately it turned out for us we were right. After that, after negotiating the freedom, I worked at the business 4 more years. We started our growth plan going again, got up to speed, and then I rode off into the sunset in about 2006 into a happy retirement. This is pretty much what the numbers looked like. From 0 to $11.5 billion last year. We'll hit $13 billion this year. And the disaster that made everybody, think we were going out of business is, in the grand scheme of things, a little blip in time. If you invested at the IPO, you've got 5x your money, and you've done pretty well. If you invested at the bottom, you've gotten 50 times your money or 100 times your money, depending, and you've done very well, if you were that clever. Not many people were, but a few were. And most importantly, the thing I'm proudest of is CarMax has now been a top 100 company to work for in the United States for the last 10 years in a row. About 700 companies a year apply for that. It's extraordinarily difficult to make it, and if you think about the fact that in the Gallup poll, auto salespeople finish close to dead last every year for the last 35 years, doing this in the auto business is really an accomplishment, so the thing I'm most proud of. So let me talk about, most of what we learn about entrepreneurs is what we read in the media. And let me talk about why to be skeptical about that. Let me tell you about the quick view of the Austin Ligon path as the media would write it up. So Fast Company would say, Austin Ligon, natural-born entrepreneur. They would talk about the fact that I come from a business family, that I started a lemonade stand when I was 9 years old, which I really did, that by the time I graduated from college, I'd run 4 small businesses of my own, that I went on to a brand new startup business school. Out of there, went to BCG, worked on new businesses, went to Bangkok, worked on turned around a Chinese restaurant, then launched Alley's, then launched CarMax, then rode off into the sunset to be an angel investor. And they would compare me to guys like Howard Schultz or at Starbucks or John Mackey at Whole Foods. And the question would be, what's next for Austin? Is he going to get involved in one of these startup businesses? Okay. Fortune, being more staid, would say, Phi Beta Kappa, Masters in Economics, Yale SOM, BCG strategy guy, senior VP at Marriott, senior VP at BCG, at CarMax, at Circuit City, and launch CarMax, and then goes off to serve on corporate boards. And the comparisons would be like Alan Mulally at Ford or somebody like that. And the question would be, is he going to run for governor of Texas? Now, my favorite magazine, Rolling Stone, would say, lucky hippie cowboy slacker, son of a Quaker Bohemian artist mom who went to an unstructured liberal arts program at the University of Texas, applied to law school, got in and didn't go 4 times, hung around Austin as a slacker grad student in economics, took his first job as a lefty economist for a while, then went to a goofball management school that nobody ever heard of, Went to BCG and was just there long enough to establish a reputation. Then he quit, chilled out in Bangkok for a couple of years. Came back, nobody knows what he did at Marriott, ended up at lucking into the opportunity of his life, found a bunch of good people to do CarMax. He took all the credit and then was smart enough to once again ride off into the sunset. There's no question who the comparison would be. It's Mark Cuban, the guy who runs the Dallas Mavericks, and the question would be, when's Austin going to buy a sports team? So, what I encourage you is be highly skeptical about the stories that the media tells you about how the world really works. For one thing, all our kids tell us you were never that cool looking, Dad. So, let me tell you a little bit about what reality is like. Here's my path. And it's being a BCG guy, I had to plot it out on a graph. So it's hippie slacker versus biz guy, bureaucrat versus entrepreneur. And you can see that it makes no sense at all. There's no such thing as, Euclid said the shortest path between 2 points is a straight line. This is definitely not a Euclidean career. My point in this for you guys is, you can be an entrepreneur whether you're an entrepreneur next week or 25 years from now. And a lot of it has to do with what do you do with your time between now and then? What approach do you take to things? And when does the opportunity that's right for you present itself? And that's what you really want to focus on. So let me talk about some of the things I actually learned very quickly along this path. University of Texas, what did I learn? That unstructured liberal arts program. I learned to be skeptical about everything. Don't ever believe what people tell you. Question, 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 question. What did I learn at SOM? From Art Swersey, what I learned is do the numbers, push through to a numerical solution, try to see if this can make any numerical sense, and then dive down and do the deep numbers. From BCG, I got to work in London, Madrid, Barcelona, Norway. What did I learn from them? I learned I love big-scale businesses. The reason I use Stalingrad is I love, the idea of global corporate warfare. My only frustration with CarMax was it couldn't be global. And that I'm pretty good at analyzing big-scale competition, understanding competitive moats, and figuring out how do you build a competitive moat so you have a survivable business. What did I learn from Bangkok, where I spent almost 3 years? What I learned was small scale, complete startup, on your own, for me, is simply too risky a profile, too slow, and too limited in the upside. And it was a great awakening. I always thought of myself as a very entrepreneurial person. But the reality is, once I encountered Thai Chinese entrepreneurs, I understood what real entrepreneurship was about, and it terrified me. And I beat a path back to the US and realized I need to work for a large company that has big capital because I'm that battalion tank commander kind of guy. That's the kind of battle I want to fight in. And then what did I learn from Alley's, the restaurant I started at Marriott? And you notice this doesn't say Alley's. What I learned is there's a great difference between a brilliant strategy and successful execution. Marriott owns 500 family restaurants, and they let me go develop a new idea in San Diego. It was a great restaurant concept, and the first 15 restaurants we converted in San Diego did phenomenally well. The problem is the other 485 restaurants under 9 brands nationwide, as people figured out, well, we're going to change everything, blah, 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 people started leaving, business started going down, and we lost our shirts. And Bill Marriott is not a guy who likes to lose his shirt. So they basically closed it, and all my Alley's restaurants are now known as Coco's. So what I learned is you have to really understand the operational reality of a complex business, the kind of business that I was learning about, and not just have a brilliant strategy. Brilliant strategy doesn't make a business. So let me talk about you and some of the other opportunities I think that are out there. And as Kyle said, my real point, as I said in the chart, was opportunity is everywhere. It's not just for 23-year-olds. It's not just for techies. It's literally whatever kind of business you want to be involved in. Let's talk a little bit about a few illustrative journeys. The great success story of the history of SOM is Bright Horizons. Linda Mason and Roger Brown, who were 2 of my classmates, Roger was actually the year after, started the business. They came to SOM. As far as I can ascertain, they had 0 business experience between them. And the first job they took out of SOM was to run a refugee camp on the Cambodian-Thai border during the Cambodian-Vietnam War. Then they came back, did some fairly normal things for a couple of years, worked for Booz and Bain, and then they left again and went to Sudan and ran Save the Children. So not exactly a typical entrepreneurial path, particularly for somebody who really didn't have business experience. Then they came back to the US and had no idea what they were going to do, and they had the good fortune to meet with a guy named James Rouse, who was the founder of sort of the festival marketplace idea, Faneuil Hall, Baltimore Harbor. He also launched the new town of Columbia. And what Rouse told him was, your passions don't have to be extracurricular. They can be central to your life. Unleash them, and you'll help other people unleash theirs. And so they went away, they thought about it, and they said, what do we care about? And what we care about is children. So let's start a business that changes the world for children. And they went out and started the nation's largest, most successful, 28 years ago, corporate child care center that really creates as good or better than home environment for kids. And out of that, a variety of charitable foundations, has about 18,000 employees now. It's made the Fortune Best 100 Company to Work For list 15 years in a row, and an outstanding business. Now let me tell you the opposite end of the world. So from MBA, startup, VC funded, let's talk about the worst company in the worst industry at the worst time to be in that industry ever in the history of mankind. And this is about inspiration. This is a car ad. So, what does this have to do with cars? You only see two pictures of a Chrysler, and you can barely tell it's Chrysler. There's a whole family of ads that were done around the Super Bowl. These were done by Sergio Marchionne. He was the most unlikely of turnaround specialists or artists. Spent 20 years going through accounting and finance in a variety of large European companies, including aluminum companies, security analysis companies, but ended up on the board of Fiat. And when Fiat was near collapse, they said, let's take a chance. This guy seems like an out-of-the-box thinker, and they made him CEO. And he turned Fiat around in less than 4 years, made the first profit that Fiat had made in over a decade, and was positioned, when the world collapsed, to be the only person in the world who was interested in Chrysler. You might remember what he paid for Chrysler, which was nothing. Barack Obama was so happy to see anybody show up and say they were willing to try to save Chrysler that Fiat basically got 20% of the business just for showing up, and then a plan to buy the rest of it pretty cheaply. And Marchionne, you see him in his full Wall Street outfit. I don't think the guy has ever owned a tie. He won't wear a tie. And you say, well, so how do you change a business like this? And the way you change a business like this is, first thing you do is you convince the people in the business that it can happen. That's what that ad was about. The ad may or may not have sold some cars, but what it did do is convince Chrysler people that we can come back, convince people in Detroit that we can come back, and persuade Americans that, you know, we ought to help them. I mean, this is a company that matters. Let me talk about the first thing that Marchionne did. In case you don't know what that is, those are the executive offices of Chrysler Corporation, kind of like a cathedral. There was a secretary outside the office of the secretary, outside the office of each executive, private dining rooms, etc. First step he took when he arrived was he locked the elevator to the floor, went down and announced to everyone, we will never enter this floor again. This is the sort of thing that killed this company. He moved his office to the fourth floor, to the middle of the engineering section, open desk, and basically told the engineers, look, you're some of the top auto engineers in the world. You haven't been used right. The only people in the world who can save this company are you guys, and I'm here to listen to you so that you can tell me how we're going to do it. The second thing he did is he went out and put the first money that Chrysler had to spend into fixing the bathrooms and repainting the rest areas in the factories. And when people ask him, how is that a priority? He said, so somebody's asking you to build a quality car and the toilet won't flush right. You know, how do you respond to that? So he's a technical guy, he's a financial guy, but what he really is somebody with what Peter Salovey would tell you is enormous emotional intelligence, who understands that the key elements are there to save this company. What he understood analytically was Chrysler just happened to own the most under-marketed brand on the face of the earth, which was Jeep. And that Fiat had a worldwide distribution network, and Jeep's hardly sold outside the United States. The United States is now exporting more cars than we've ever exported, and the single biggest reason for that is the exports of Jeep. Chrysler made $2.8 billion last year. Chrysler is now saving Fiat. So this is talk about a guy who's in a high-wire act. But I would consider this to be one of the greatest entrepreneurs of my lifetime, and yet he did it in an industry that is nothing like what you traditionally think of as an entrepreneurial industry. How many of you have a Nest? Okay, so I'm going to talk about Tony Fadell. Tony Fadell was an electrical engineer. He was a tinkerer. His dad was a tinkerer. He, was the kind of guy who took apart every radio, every engine, every clock in the house. Sometimes he put them together, sometimes he didn't. But he wasn't the kind of guy that somehow could get in an entrepreneurial environment early on. And so he worked for about 20 years for a variety of big technical companies out in Silicon Valley. And he actually came up with a great idea for a single button music player, and he couldn't raise money to do it. So failing that, he got hired by Apple, and he launched it for them, and it's called the iPod. Now, you never heard of Tony Fadell because a certain former CEO of Apple didn't like to give anybody else the credit. But Tony Fadell is the guy who came up with the idea. He also played a big role in the iPhone and the iPad. And after 10 years of fighting, threatening to quit 4 or 5 times, he made enough money off of Apple stock that he said, okay, Steve, wonderful thing. I'm headed to not the beach, I'm headed to Lake Tahoe. Quit, went to Lake Tahoe, had a 3-year non-compete, started building his dream house. And as the video just showed, the first thing he realized is, look at this stupid thermostat. I mean, this is like primitive 50-year-old technology. I can do better than this. And as he started thinking about it, he thought, other people would like the same iPod, one-button, simple technology, and he developed Nest. Does anybody in here know that Nest sold to Google earlier this year for $3.28 billion? So Tony Fadell has finally gotten his chance to be an entrepreneur, and Larry Page thinks so much of him that he reports directly to the CEO of Google, and many people think that, in fact, Tony may well be the guy who is in line to be the next CEO of Google, because their view of him is he's a guy who can bring leading-edge technology to fairly plebeian products. Another arena, and another guy who didn't start out in what you'd call a traditional entrepreneurial path. Now I'm going to talk for those of you who are interested in saving the world sooner, who are willing to do it on a shoestring, who are interested in doing it outside the United States, and who have a social mission. I'm going to talk about 3 women in Africa who started educational ventures. Tony Maraviglia, Faraja Nialandu, and Nisha Ligon. I confess, Nisha's my daughter, so I'm prejudiced here. Each of the 3 of these women started a business for less than $100,000, an education business. In Tony's case, she was a Teach for America teacher. She then worked 8 years teaching in the United States and in Africa, and she finally decided she had $50,000 saved up to go get an MBA, and decided, I'm going to take my money, go to Nairobi, and start a business. And the business she found was the biggest challenge in Kenyan education is kids who have finished primary school have to take the exam to get into high school and are unable to pass it. So she created an SMS-based, text-based tutoring system. She now has 300,000 users. She's in her 2nd round of funding. And it's a for-profit benefit company business. So it both benefits shareholders and has a social mission. Faraja Nialandu was, in fact, Miss Tanzania in 2004. She used that notoriety to get into law school in England, got a law degree, came back, practiced law, got married. She and her husband put together $50,000 in savings. She started something called shula.com. The problem in Tanzania is that high school kids, the majority of high school kids, don't actually have access to textbooks for their education. So she's putting the entire high school curriculum online. People A lot of people don't have computers either, but they can get together. There's an effort to roll individual computers into high school. Nisha is a biology student, a documentary filmmaker, decided to go into education, worked for a company called the Virtual School in London, and then decided, you know, what good am I doing? She had spent a couple of years in Africa, learned Swahili, and thought, you know, I need to go be on the ground where things are happening. So she took the money that she was supposed to use to go to film school and went to Dar es Salaam and started this business.
Bongo is an entertainment social enterprise based right here in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. We've made Bongo Kids to bring Tanzanian kids like me our own cartoon and find the fun in math. Bongo Kids is the only local cartoon made in Tanzania for Tanzania.
We self-funded the production of our first 6 episodes in Kiswahili, and then a great corporate sponsor came in to help us finish the season and get it on Tanzanian national TV every weekend.
So this was from a Kickstarter campaign. They raised $50,000 so that they can translate this in English, because it's now actually on Tanzanian nationwide TV 4 times a week. You can kind of think it as Sesame Street for kids who speak Swahili, but it's one of the keys is nobody had ever actually made an animated cartoon in an African language. And the whole idea was most of these kids have never left the village. And so the idea is to teach them math with village-based ideas, with village-based scenarios, and to do it through television, which 70% of the population has, as opposed to the internet, which only 5% has. They also have linked through SMS so that you can take little tests and win little prizes. Once again, a bootstrap-funded business, the sort of thing that I think is ideal for Yale social entrepreneurs. And the one thing I can tell you, I'm an investor in 2 of these businesses and know all 3 women. Every one of them would tell you now, boy, I wish I had had time to go to Yale SOM. And not just business school in general. They all understand now this is the place they would want to have come, because this is the place that they would best have learned what they need to know. And now that they're all in the middle of business, building businesses, and none of them intended to be entrepreneurs, they're finding out, gee, there are all these things that I wish I knew something about, like accounting, tax, stuff like that, that would be useful. So to my point, there are a lot of different approaches you can take here. It's not just the Mark Zuckerberg approach. So let's talk about you and how you can utilize SOM. First thing is to assess yourself. And I would love to tell you I did a brilliant assessment when I left business school. I wasn't nearly that self-aware. I might be able to do it today. But the first thing is, back to Linda and Rogers, what are your passions? Because for most entrepreneurs, what really drives them is not money. I mean, really successful entrepreneurs are almost all driven by what they care about deeply, because that's the only thing that's going to sustain you through the rigors of entrepreneurship. So what is it that you really care about? What is it you dream about? What is it you want to do? Second thing is, what are your core skills? A legitimate inventory of what did you know before you came to SOM. Some of them, you talk to some folks, highly educated, highly technical electrical engineers. Some of the rest of you are like my wife, probably French and English literature majors whose most advanced math class was first year calculus. The real question is, what are your skills? Inventory those skills and figure out what do you want to develop here at SOM. And then the next most important thing is post-SOM. Now, a lot of people think your job post-SOM is to get a job and make the most money. I always say the most important thing is learning, not earning. That when you leave SOM, the most important thing to do in your next job is find out where can I learn the most. Because it really conditions where you're going to be able to go with your career and with your entrepreneurial efforts. Now, that's all well and good, but let's talk about constraints and enablers. I didn't have a penny when I came to SOM. I was on half scholarship, but that was half enough. So I went out with the maximum amount of debt you could have, fairly soon got married, fairly soon had a family. Those are constraints. And many of you have similar constraints, and that puts a little reality around, can I afford to go just do whatever I want? Or do I have some things that I have to do? Do I have to have a paycheck coming in? But you also have enablers. There's an interesting term in Silicon Valley now called HPS. Stands for High Performing Spouse. And it's one of the things that And Silicon Valley being a very male area, it's usually actually HPF, which is high performing female, which means you have a spouse who's a lawyer, a consultant, somebody who's bringing in an income. And the good news for VCs is that means we don't have to pay this guy or this woman very much money because they've got somebody else who can pay the bills. So, but that is an enabler. Having a cooperative spouse or significant other who can help and is willing to can be very helpful. Having a family that can help can be very helpful. So you want to go through and do a realistic inventory of what you may have some savings of what are your pluses and what are your minuses in terms of when you can start. And then the final thing is your personality. As I said in Bangkok, I discovered that, yeah, you know, I may think I'm a big risk taker, but once I really confront true, on-the-ground, from-scratch entrepreneurs, that's not me. And it's one of the things you want to be honest with yourself about because there's a place for you in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, but you want to understand where that place best is. One of the tests that somebody, Dick Hexter, who co-taught the entrepreneurship class when I was here, suggested was the brick wall test, which is if you've hit your head into a brick wall 199 times, what's the certainty in your mind that the 200th time will be the time you go through? And he said, most entrepreneurs, it's 100%, you know. That they, you know, that last 199 times, that was bad luck, but this time it's 100% and this is going to work. And the degree to which you have that level of confidence helps you understand, you know, where do I fit in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and you know, do I need to complement myself with partners who are different than I am? Let's talk about building an entrepreneurial mindset in whatever you do. The first thing to do is open your eyes to everything. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is everything you look at, think of as a business and think of how could this be better? What is it the people who are engaged with this organization really want compared to what the organization is offering? Just as an exercise. I mean, actually my kids hate this because every time we go in a hotel or a restaurant or any sort of service organization, within the first 5 minutes, I'm sort of critiquing the process of the restaurant and how it could be better. And it's kind of like, Daddy, shut up. But I think it's a mindset that's good practice to help you just think about, if I were in charge of this place, how could I make it better? Movie theaters, I don't even want to get started on movie theaters. You want to have an optimistic perspective, as we just talked about with the brick wall. I mean, there's no such thing as a pessimistic entrepreneur. The world is just going to put too many blocks in your passageway for you to be pessimistic. And you've got to have a positive outlook. You've got to look at, lean toward the bright side of things. And as I say, you need to not only dream, you need to hallucinate. I used to tell people at CarMax, in company meetings, my job is to be hallucinator in chief, because when people used to ask, oh, you know, when we'd gotten to be a $2 or $3 billion company, and they would say, well, gee, did you ever think that CarMax would be this big? My answer was absolutely. I mean, our plan from day one was this is going to be at least a $50 billion business, if not bigger. And you know, that's always been the plan. And somebody has to be thinking on that scale. I mean, you don't get to be a $50 or $100 billion business by thinking, oh, we could be a $200 million business someday. I mean, you need to be able to be positive and think big if you want to play the entrepreneurial rule. And finally, you need to develop as a mental discipline a contrarian view. That is, however the rest of the world thinks things should work, assume that they're wrong. Because if they're right, there's probably not a whole lot of value to be added. If the common wisdom is right about something, that's probably not a good area for you to be focused. But if you step back and you say, so what if the common wisdom is wrong? What if the fact that shower curtains are always straight is the right way to do shower curtains? Has anybody noticed that in most hotels now, shower curtains are curved and you no longer stick to the nasty shower? You know, how come it took 50 years for some guy to figure out that if you curve the shower curtain, having a shower and a bath would be a better experience? And it's really because people don't step back and just take a contrarian view. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, that's one of the key things that you want to do. So let's talk about making SOM work for you. First thing is leadership development program. The absolute secret, the Tom Kolditz's group is a new group at SOM, but the absolute secret of SOM since the very beginning has been behavioral dynamics and interactive behavioral dynamics. What we called IGB, individual and group behavior, was the class we all hated the most because we were kind of treated like lab rats back in our day, and they put us in groups and then they create conflict. If you go back, everybody who ended up running an organization who came out of SOM in those days would tell you, I wish I'd taken more of the IGB and behavioral classes, because what you will find is people are your main problem. When you build an organization, getting Sally and Tommy to play well together, your associates, and getting Sally and Tommy to interact well with Billy and Susie, your customers, is the main thing that you'll end up doing. Those are your biggest problems. And you have the opportunity here. No one studies leadership more intensely than the military, and particularly the U.S. military. That background, the science of leadership, is what Tom Kolditz is focused on. So I would say take everything in that arena, get engaged in every way you can, and learn everything you can about what are your strengths as a leader, what are your weaknesses as a leader, how can you build your strengths, and how can you probably can't fix your weaknesses. What you can do is figure out what kind of person would be complementary to me. So when I started an organization, who do I need to have at my side? I'm a terrible negotiator. I can't negotiate my way out of a wet paper bag. The CFO at CarMax was a brilliant negotiator. I never negotiated anything. All of us have those pluses and minuses. Figure out what your minuses are and who you need as team members. Second thing is skills development. This is what the faculty like to hear. I mean, you're here to learn some things. One of the things I'd encourage you is become really great at something. Become the person that all your classmates look to as, the behavioral finance wizard, the accounting wizard, the operations research wizard, the marketing wizard, the strategy wizard. Another dimension that we often don't think about, how many people in here speak a foreign language at a level you could give a business presentation? That's great. That's probably 40% of the class. How many speak two? That's really good. Okay. For those of you who didn't raise your hand to either time, it's an enormous value in today's global world to speak a language, not at the level that you can go to a restaurant and order a meal, but literally to the level that you can stand up and give a business presentation. The only way I ever got to BCG London, they weren't looking for guys from West Texas to send to London. The only reason I got there is I happened to spend a year in Peru, learn Spanish. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. That means I should stop. One-eyed man is king, and it turned out the London office of BCG had a bunch of Spanish work. The French spoke Spanish, but the Spanish hate the French, so they wouldn't let the French work there. And the Germans don't speak any Spanish, so it was to the London office, and they didn't have anybody who spoke Spanish. So I got hired for the plum job worldwide in BCG, which was the London office, because I just happened to be the guy who spoke Spanish well enough to get up and do a business presentation in Spanish. So that's a skill that SOM isn't going to directly focus you on, but I would add that to your portfolio if you possibly can. And the other thing I do here, the really unique thing, is the deal flow of people. And let me start with recruiting. Never in your life will you be able to date all the boys or all the girls and get away with it and have no one look askance at you. You can interview with 100 companies if you want to, and no company will think you're an awful person. Believe me, once you're in a company, your boss does not like to hear that you're interviewing with the competition. But here you can interview with everybody. That doesn't mean you want to go to work with all of them. What that means is it's a chance for you to learn about a huge number of organizations in some detail where you can ask people any question and they feel obligated to answer it. And believe me, that does not happen in the rest of your life. So you should interview really broadly and use that. And then you're going to have entrepreneurs, you're going to have big business guys, you're going to have political leaders, you've got all your classmates from around the world, you've got the other different groups that SOM is bringing in, you've got the faculty. Just wear people out by asking them questions, proposing business ideas, and talking to them about it, because you've really got this unbelievably rich resource here. And believe me, the rest of your life won't be like this. I mean, when you leave here, you will never again have the opportunities that you have here and the leeway to express those opportunities. So take advantage of the deal flow of people here while you're here. So with that, I think I have a few minutes left. So let me open it up to some questions, because I'd love to answer comments, anything anybody wants to ask. Don't be shy, because if you are, I'll call on you. Yeah?
Hi, Ari. Thank you very much for being here.
Sure.
You talked about the number one issue, one of the
Okay.
most important things for your start a business is having a passion and being dedicated to it. But you prefaced everything by saying that when you started CarMax, you looked at the Department of Commerce book
Right.
and saw which one where there was a need and
Yeah.
just kind of jumped into it. Are you passionate about cars? Were you ever did you come at like what? How did this?
So remember what I said the two businesses we looked at were? Furniture and cars. So how passionate are you about couches? So of course I'm passionate about cars. I mean, who's not? You know, cars are fun. And so that was an easy choice to make. And actually, we were all really enthusiastic that we found cars as an opportunity, because I don't know, but I mean, it's pretty easy. When you do focus groups, you ask people to compare themselves to a car as a way of getting a psychological profile. I mean, people are deeply invested in the automotive world in the United States, so it's a lot of fun. Would I have been willing to do another business if it was something I could get excited about? But you know, when we found cars, it was kind of like, hey, we don't need to think anymore. This is really cool business. Yes.
Do you have any advice about taking like a short or long-term view about sort of opportunities and opportunity costs versus going to maybe a consulting firm initially versus
Yeah.
doing an entrepreneurship thing initially? How to assess that, perhaps?
Yeah, you know, the answer is do your self-assessment. You know, what can you afford? I mean, look, realistically, I got offered a lot of money by BCG. I had a lot of debts. I was getting married, and I loved BCG. I mean, it was just the most fun place I'd ever worked. Consulting, I would differentiate consulting from investment banking. I'm not a fan of investment banking or the finance industry as a way to become an entrepreneur. Doesn't mean you can't, but it's pretty rare, particularly given how much money you make once you get in that industry. Consulting, on the other hand, I think 2 or 3 years in consulting is like postgraduate work in business. Just don't stay. Don't become a lifetime consultant. My friends who became lifetime consultants, I think by and large, you know, you're always outside the fray. So you can learn something for a couple of years. And if you need the money, it's a great thing to do. If you're not convinced that your business skills, I mean, that's what Roger and Linda did. They went and they were consultants for a couple of years, and they really got you know, a fire hose course in real business, and it helped them feel confident that they were, you know, willing to be entrepreneurs. So it really depends on you as an individual. There are other folks here who are clearly ready to go out and start something and are in an economic and personal position to do that. So I would say everybody's different. Some of us are more cautious, some of us are more aggressive. You know, don't beat yourself up over that. I mean, my son was classmates with Mark Zuckerberg. They were on the math team together, and Mark wandered across the Stanford campus just after he founded Facebook and kind of offhandedly ran into Aaron and said, "Oh, hey, you want to quit school and come join me?" And my son said no. Which was the logical thing to do, except for it probably cost him, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars. And it took him several years to kind of get over that. But, but as a venture capitalist I know told him, he said, look, you know, it would have ruined your life. You'd have been another one of these guys who gets into an organization, you get into a position you can't really hold on to because the organization outgrows you. You make 20, 30, 40 million dollars, and then your life is ruined. Now you got to understand, Silicon Valley has a different perspective on money than most human beings. But his point was, no one will ever hire you. No one will ever invest in you when you have that much money that young, but you don't have enough to go start your own thing. And that made him feel a little better. You know, he tried to convince himself. But the point is, everybody is going to end up on a different path, and you've got to assess yourself. You've got to make some bets. Some will be right, some will be wrong. Ray Kroc was 56 years old when he was selling a soft-serve ice cream machine to some guys out in San Bernardino, California, called the McDonald's Brothers. And he found the opportunity of his lifetime. He'd been looking for 30 years, and he found it then. It's never too late to be an entrepreneur. My view is keep learning at whatever you're doing. Don't beat yourself up if you're not an entrepreneur the day you go out of school, but work on these aspects of having an entrepreneurial mindset. If you're ready for it, that's great. You know, take the plunge. Bill Donaldson always said, don't be afraid to jump off the diving board. But you know, you have to make your own assessment of your risk value, and there's clearly no one right path. But I think if you stay open-minded and say, this is what I want to do, you know, that'll give you the opportunity at some point. One more. Okay. Sure.
What's the reason for not taking CarMax global?
Not taking CarMax global. So the history of people who build retail businesses and go outside the United States before they dominate the United States is they usually lose twice. They fail overseas, and it costs them a lot of money. So think about if we wanted to open CarMax in China, you know, fastest growing, biggest car market in the world. Would you send like your 5th best guy there? No. You'd have to send your absolute best guy. Well, we're not even in San Francisco. We're not in Boston. We're not in New York. Does it make any sense to send the best guy that we have to a market that we don't understand at all, that may not be able to make money for us for years? So the answer is, I used to always tell the analysts on Wall Street, the day I talk about international expansion, make sure the board fires me, because we're 20 years away from being able to do that. I actually work with companies overseas. I'm a evangelist for CarMax. CarMax probably has another 20 years of growth in the US before they're ready to go overseas. And my successor, Tom Folliard, he has a passport, but as far as I know, the only place he's ever used it is to go to the Bahamas. So he's not exactly internationally oriented. But it's the right thing. I mean, it's a domestic business. We can grow to be a $50 billion business in the US. Going at the wrong time is the wrong thing. Once you own your domestic market, like McDonald's did, and you go overseas and you're powerful and you can afford it, and you can send really good guys, that's when you conquer the world. And what happens if other people take our idea and implement it? That's life. There's nothing you can do about that. And in fact, my view, the reason I help people overseas try to get started with something like a CarMax is, my view is if somebody can successfully start something, it may be something that CarMax buys as an entry vehicle in the same way that Walmart bought Asda or Gigante, I think it was, that they bought in Mexico. So it's very difficult to do, and that's why CarMax hadn't done it. Thanks.
I hope Austin has convinced you that no matter what your interests or your skills, that you too can be an entrepreneur, and that you don't need to be exactly like he is. Austin, you are, as ever, tremendously inspirational and thoughtful, and I am sincerely appreciative that you took the time to be with us here today. Thank you.
Okay, so if you can, we're going to dismiss our speaker and our deans, and then we're going to move on. So the next session of the day is Explore Yale. So hopefully by this point, you've all chosen the way you'd like